Hi, this is Approved of God, coming to you once again with another video. A few weeks ago, I did a video on a certain Dr. Garza. And the reason I did this video is because he's supposed to be a Hebrew scholar and has Jewish roots. And so I thought it would be interesting to do a video on him since he believes in the Trinity. But not only has he written books on the Trinity, but he teaches that the origin of the Trinity appears in Genesis 18. Well, he starts off with maybe a few chapters down, but then he emphasizes that in chapter 18 of Genesis, they actually saw the Trinity. This first clip is about Dr. Garza teaching that the Trinity is found in Genesis 18. Let's watch it.
Put aside the New Testament for a minute. We're going to look at the Old. We're going to see how God revealed himself there. And then on our next, and my next teaching, which is a month from now, we're going to look at the idea of how we got this New Testament theology of the Trinity, utilizing the Messiah, Jesus, of how he came into our world and from where. So if we start from the Old Testament, we'll be able to see where it all fits in the New. And we've got to see this to understand where we're going to go for the next from here. Because if we look at chapter 18, the question is how, or now about all together, how can they be one? How do they appear as one? Do we have anything that shows them that they all appear together? So we have these different appearances in the Old Testament, how Yah appears. Now, if we look at Genesis 18:1, this is right after 17. Again, we're going this chapter from 12 to 17. We just saw these three manifestations, these three appearings. In Genesis 18, we have this. And Yahweh visually appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, and he was sitting at the door of the tent in the heat of the day. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. And he saw, and he ran to greet them, or meet them from the entrance of the tent. And he bowed to the ground and said, O Yahweh, if now I have found favor in your sight, I beg you, do not leave from your servant here. So what do we have? A couple of key things when you look at. Yahweh appeared. Abraham looks up and sees 3 men, and then he runs to greet them or meet them. Literally in Hebrew, it's more of a greet. He's going to greet them. And how does he greet them? Not him, as in singular, but them. He bows down to the ground and says, O Yahweh. What's interesting is Moses didn't say Yahweh appeared with 2 messengers or 2 angels or 2 men. He didn't say that. In fact, Moses said he saw that Yahweh appeared. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men, 3 anashim in Hebrew, which means literally he saw 3 men as Yahweh. Because Moses could have easily said Yahweh appeared with 2 men, and that's why Abraham saw Yahweh. We could have said, okay, well, one of them was Yahweh, and the other 2 were just somebody else. But Moses says Yahweh appears, Abraham sees 3 men, Abraham goes to greet them, literally in the Hebrew, to go greet them. Now, how does he greet them? Traditionally, in that time, he bowed down as he prostrated himself to the ground to them and declared, O Yahweh. That's how he greeted them, not him as in one person, but them. So who are these 3? Well, if you remember what Moses wrote, we have only the 3 appearances of the Word, the messenger, and of course, El, the Almighty. Those are the only 3 that appeared to Abraham that Moses wrote. And yet here you are as 3 men, he appears to him. What's interesting in this passage is, in verse 5 and 9, Moses records him as speaking as one. They said. Verse 5, they said. Verse 9, they said. They speak as one. And of course, it says after that, and Yahweh said. Now, in the next chapter, these 3 have a conversation as Yahweh. Yahweh asks, Yahweh responds. And he even speaks in the third person. Who went down to Sodom and Gomorrah? After Yahweh says, I will descend, I will go down, Yahweh said. It says, and the men turned around from there and went towards Sodom, and Abraham was still standing before Yahweh. So who went? The men, the other men, because we're going to see in 19 that 2 men approach Lot. So 2 go and 1 stay with Abraham. But Yahweh said, I will go down, I will descend. We have to pay attention because the language kind of tells us, Moses is telling us, kind of giving us hints of who's going. So the 2 men get up and go. And what do we find? The 2 men come to Lot, the 2 messengers. Now your Bibles will say angels, and we talked about this in the last lessons about the word angel, and we have to get away from that. It's messengers here. We have to understand that God can be called by a messenger. The two messengers came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself down with his face to the earth and said, "My lords." So this is the same thing that happened earlier with Abraham. He looks up, sees two men, goes to meet them or greet them, and then he bows himself down and says, "My lords." Now, I'm going to argue, because that word in Hebrew, my lords, Adonai, can literally mean my lords or my masters. It can literally mean Yahweh himself. It can be used two different ways. And the only way we know that is by how the Jews put those little dashes underneath, the markings, to tell you if it should be my lords or Yahweh's name. And I'm going to argue that it should be for Yahweh, the name of God. And we're going to see why, because Lot will address him by that name. So the translation might say my lords, but I'm going to argue from the text and the context that he bowed down himself the way Abraham did and said, "Oh Adonai," referring to the name of God.
This next clip is Dr. Michael Brown as he's talking to a Jew and talking about God being able to manifest himself on the earth. And listen to what he says about Genesis 18.
Yeah, so tell me your thoughts as an Orthodox Jew. Tell me your thoughts.
Well, the main interesting thing I saw in your book was the chapter, "The Secret of the Invisible God Who Can Be Seen."
Mm-hmm.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you're making the argument that, just like there's nothing idolatrous in believing in a concept of a Shekhinah, a divine presence, or in a temple, or in, how many Hasidic Jews believe in the idea of Elikus, that everything is made out of divine essence.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong about believing Jesus is a Shekhinah, a proto-Shekhinah, or a greater Shekhinah, so to speak. Is that the argument?
Yeah, I mean, that would be an analogous thing, that just as the Shekhinah was the manifest presence of God on the earth, and yet did not exhaust the fullness of God as God remained enthroned in heaven and filling the universe, that, as one rabbi said to me decades ago, that Jesus was like a walking Shekhinah, that the presence of God was indwelling a human being, and that God was manifest in the life of a human being. The Word became flesh. So right. So to understand this, then let's just try to work through some examples. So in Genesis 18, where the most plain reading of the text is that the Lord Himself appears to Abraham along with two angels. One of the three men clearly seems to be the Lord Himself, and Abraham has an extended conversation with Him. And when they're done, he walks away. Was that God in the flesh or not?
I don't know what you mean by God in the flesh. To give a parallel example, you have like Numbers chapter 12, where it talks about God coming down in a pillar of a cloud. Was that God in the pillar of cloud?
Well, it does say about the pillar of cloud that the Lord spoke to him face to face, like in Exodus 33, as a man speaks with his friend. But it's just, you have three people. It says that Adonai appeared to him, right? Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh appeared to him. And that it's clear that you have, once you get to the end of the chapter, beginning the 19th, that one of the three men that came was the Lord Himself. The other two were angels. And that Abraham's taught, the Lord's talking directly, "Shall I withhold from Abraham what I want to do?" So was that one that the scriptures identify as Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the Lord Himself, who has a conversation with Abraham and Sarah, and then an extended conversation with Abraham, and He's called the judge of all the earth, etc. Abraham's talking to him. Was that God in human form?
I don't know exactly what you mean by God in human form. If you mean it was an expression of God in human form, then yes.
Well, what's an expression of God? Do you talk to an expression of God? Does an expression of God give promises?
Yeah. Well, why not? You again, when you have the pillar of cloud coming down in Numbers chapter 12, and the pillar of cloud sends messages and stuff like that.
But the cloud is not called. The cloud is not called the Lord, whereas this man in Genesis 18 is called the Lord.
Well, yeah, but it does say God came down in a pillar of cloud. So, what big of a difference is it? Just and then it just calls him by his name from then on, doesn't it?
Okay. So the fact that you're saying that's an expression of God in human form.
The basic reading of the text would read that way, yeah. And,
Okay, an expression of God in human form. All right. So you worship God, you don't worship the expression.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, fine. So this expression of God in human form is Yeshua. We don't worship the physical body, but we worship the God who expressed himself through Yeshua.
But here's the thing. We have two Jews, two doctors of doctrine. One believes that the Genesis 18 is about the Trinity, but Dr. Michael Brown says that no, there's no Trinity in Genesis 18. It is God and his two angels, which is the correct interpretation of that verse. Anybody who knows how to read can look through that and see that it says that the Lord appeared unto Abraham. And then we know it's two angels because the two that were with the one God, they left to Sodom and Gomorrah, and the Bible says that they were angels or messengers. Very simple to understand. You don't have to know Hebrew to know that. The translations that were given are correct. But nonetheless, Dr. Michael Brown asserts and believes that it is God and his two angels. So when I did this video, the comeback that Dr. Al gave me, Dr. Al Garza, was that Dr. Brown is a good friend of his, and that was an old clip that of Dr. Michael Brown. But since then, Dr. Michael Brown admits to the teaching of Dr. Al Garza that Genesis 18 is about the Trinity. And he says that he agrees with him and that he's a good friend and so forth. And so that was the end of the discussion. 1 hour ago, LOL, Dr. Brown is my good friend, and he admits that my view and interpretation is also correct and can be applied to Genesis 18:19 from the Hebrew. You lack the simple reading of the text in context from the Hebrew, Dr. L. Garza. I wonder if Dr. L. Garza really told me the truth. And so I commented on the video and I requested information, and I told him about Dr. L. Garza and how he was saying that Dr. Michael Brown believed like him, that Genesis 18 is about a Trinity. He agreed with him. And I got a response from that, and this is the response. Ask Dr. Brown. From the Ask Dr. Brown team, we very much appreciate Dr. Garza and his work, but Dr. Brown's view on Genesis 18 remains the same. Yahweh are God and two angels. In conclusion, I don't want to say anything bad about Dr. El Garza, but I am pointing out these things because I feel that when we teach the gospel and we claim to be Christian, we should be as honest as we can be. And this is one of the things that I strive for, to be honest in my videos, and whatever I say, that I can prove it. God bless.